condominium owner that there are foreclosures in my building, and the rest of us have to pick up the maintenance fees. There didn't seem to be any stimulus money for that type of situations as there is for housing and different things. How do you think we're going to address that if this continues in the buildings? We can't continue to pick up the maintenance fees on those foreclosed apartments, and you don't get anything when they foreclose, even though you have filed a judgment or whatever. So
well,
it's becoming a problem, I think, when your maintenance fee goes up 20%.
Sure. Well, it certainly isn't a problem that I have a magic solution to. There's an economic crisis that's headed towards condominium owners, because when most of them were built, they're starting to come to the end of what their natural infrastructure life would have been. So I'm sure I don't have to tell you that. That's why a lot of the maintenance fees have gone up, is because there's a lot of upkeep charges that are increasing. And you're correct that state and federal policy really hasn't focused on that. The best I think that we can do is try to be an advocate for you. City government certainly doesn't have the resources to address it, but we would certainly try to be an advocate for you. We've also tried to help all of the buildings in the Gold Coast try to organize and associate with one another, because that's what gets political attention, is organization. And when we had our meeting that we had last year, that was the first meeting where all of the building managers and owners had assembled in how many years?
2006, and then really got off the ground during this administration, right? But to try to reinvigorate what used to be known as the Gold Coast Consortium, and since then, Mayor Fitzgerald, through planning and development, has offered that whatever resources we can give to help get that association back off the ground for the purpose of development and planning for our entire neighborhood, but also a big piece of it for advocacy. So through Nate Kelly and the mayor, we've had at least 4 meetings now on planning and what else a consortium could do for the neighborhood.
I mean, I wish I had a quicker solution for you, but I think that if there's going to be, I think you're correct in diagnosing the problem. There hasn't been much of a federal solution to that or a state solution to that. It's because it hasn't really been on people's radar screen. So how do you, when there's a foreclosure in a condominium, you don't see it unless you live in the building. I mean, it's not going to be an eyesore that people are going to point out. And so, as any way we can work with you and your association to get it on our state senator's radar screen, our congressman's radar screen, we'll work with you on that.
Well, it just seems to me that this is a very big tax base for the city. And I remember working on the Winton place when they converted to condominiums. That's how long I've been here. And that was a League of Women Voters study at the time. But I know it's a big tax base, but it's getting to be a problem, and I don't see where there's going to be a remedy to this. And there was nothing for condominiums, but there was in housing in all of the packages of the stimulus and so forth. So I don't know how we're going to address that, but I'm sure it's on your agenda.
I agree with you that it's a huge part of our tax base. Look, if the Gold Coast declines, it won't just affect the Gold Coast. It'll affect the finances of the city in general. And that's one of the we talk about I'm talking about the Gold Coast here, but I also talk about it when I go elsewhere in Lakewood, because there are some people that say the creation of the Gold Coast really helped save Lakewood at the time, because back when it was formed, the city's tax base, because we don't have a big industrial sector here, and our businesses are mostly small businesses. We have a lot of housing, but most of it is middle class housing. This area pays more for it pays more than it gets in terms of services, so it's a contributor to the tax base. It's not a user of the tax base, let's say, or a deficit for the tax base. So I don't know exactly what the solution is, except that if the Gold Coast Association wanted to have a meeting with our congressional representatives to talk about that, to see if there could be any relief on the federal level and try to get some tax changes to help, I'd be happy to facilitate that with either Senator Brown or Senator Williams or Congressman Kucinich. I'd be happy to do that. Any other questions? Going once, going twice? Yeah. Oh, Dave, hi there.
Hey. What reserves we do have, are they invested with solid banks? For example, First Federal of Lakewood is extremely highly rated, in spite of its small size. Have you looked into that? I'm sure you have in the last year or two.
Most of it is invested in rare coins. One of the many parts of our revenue that went down. Our property taxes went down, our revenue from property taxes went down. We lost $1 million last year in revenue from property taxes, and our income taxes went down by a couple $100,000. And so everything went down. Another thing that went down was the return on our investments. We operate through a state fund basically, and it isn't something where we pick and choose. I mean, we shop around a little bit, but like all of you know who have savings accounts, we used to be able to get 6-7% return on our daily cash, because you don't have to just have a surplus. You don't just invest a surplus. You invest whatever you have cash on hand. So if you spend $100 million throughout the year, and maybe you only have a $5 million surplus at the end of the year, you're not just investing the $5 million. It's a little bit different because the money is constantly coming in, constantly coming out. So you do have a daily balance that you're getting that's pretty high actually, but it's just not generating anything hardly. So yes, the good news is they're safe. They're not at risk. We didn't invest in junk bonds or anything like that. They were very stable, conservative banking institutions that none of which collapsed or anything like that. So we're not exposed for anything like that. But the bad news is just the return on those investments has been almost nil. We've got almost nothing from it. So that's unfortunate. Yeah.
I know your street budget is limited, but is Lake Avenue anywhere in the foreseeable horizon for fixing?
Well, no, not from city funds only, but that is a state route, and that means that it's more likely to get state funding. So, for instance, Riverside Drive was done a few years ago, and that's a state route, and that ended up getting state money. So sometimes when it's a state route, they'll pay 80% of it, and we'll only have to pay 20%. There's also certain roads that are county roads, which some people don't know which ones are the county roads. You probably remember. Bill will probably know which ones are county roads. Did I speak correctly? Is Lake Road a state road? Okay, good man. Thank you. We'll have to see if that's going to be anywhere coming, and so it's a possibility. We always ask for state money. There's also a pool of state money that we can ask for any project. So, for instance, we've been asking for about 3 years for Bunce Road, actually about 4 years, and we finally got it. And we pay. It's always a matching situation, so we pay a certain amount, and then the county will pay a certain amount, and the state will pay a certain amount. So I don't think. Did I misspeak? Is Lake Road anywhere? It's really not, is it? It's really not. I mean, I understand it's not pristine, but it's compared to some of the, I mean, we have some roads in the city right now that are just absolutely impassable. The other thing is, when we decide to do a road on our own, we have very limited funds, first of all, but when we do, if we were going to try to do Lake Road on our own, it would be so horrifically expensive that it would be all we could do for 10 years, So when we're going to do a road on our own, we tend to do the smaller residential streets, and we wait for state help on the bigger ones. So we'll keep our fingers crossed. We try to be very aggressive about getting state money. We actually did get more state money last year than we had in several years before that, but we'll have to see what happens